To start with, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I introduce you to Susie, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We've got a wide range of individuals who've joined today, both across the UK and also some internationally. And this is a wide range of clients of IPS based in London, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, and also a number of clients for our legal recruiter, Anna Conceal. This should hopefully give us a wide range of questions and perspectives when we come to the question and answer session later on once Susie's spoken. It's going to give us a couple of rules on how the webinar will work today. We are recording this session. The aim is there to be able to provide you with a link to the recording afterwards should you want to recap on anything. I do emphasise that there's no personal information recorded in this session. Just onto a couple of house rules. Please do keep yourself on mute. We're trying to do that anyway, but if you keep yourself on mute so there's no background noise while Susie's speaking. When we come on to the question and answer session, we think it's going to be best if you all enter your questions into the chat box facility on here. Hopefully we'll be able to find that. If you do that while Susie's talking, and then towards the end of Susie's speech, I will then start to go through those questions and I'll ask Susie, and then we can go through a range of answers. We can also then work on things towards the end. We've been delighted to be introduced to Susie in the last couple of weeks. We're certainly very excited about this. But if I now introduce you to Susie and hand you over to Susie, then we can take it from there. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, and hello everyone virtually. I have an awful habit of waving, and then I realise virtually I have very large hands on screens, so I need to stop doing that. It's my lesson learned through this pandemic of my large hands virtually. I just want to start off by saying hello and to say thank you to IPS for talking to me and allowing me to be part of this really exciting conversation, because it's a hard conversation, and it's a subject that some of us are really keen to talk about, but some of us are nervous to talk about it, and I think that's really normal. That's very natural, and so it's a joy to be here Friday morning to start this conversation. Just to introduce myself, I'm Susie. I've got 25 years of working within the NHS and charity sector. And throughout that whole time, I've been supporting people's mental health. So whether that be young people, their families, colleagues, it's just been a job that I've done forever, and I love and adore it. We've done it in very different settings, in different situations. So as you can imagine, at the moment within the NHS, it's a challenging time and place to work, and likewise within charity sectors, it's tough working within charities, and I think also just working with patients. A lot of my patient focus was young people with cancer, which is a big thing. Obviously that was young people. I started off working with children and then worked with young adults and their families and friends. And yeah, it's something that I was very passionate about. I then joined a charity, and for 17 years I led a team and service who were dedicated to raising awareness of cancer, but also really trying to create safe places for people to start talking about cancer. I look at mental health today, and I think mental health as a subject is where cancer was 20 years ago, when we were very nervous to say the word out loud. We didn't want to say the wrong thing. We didn't want to say it out loud because it was just scary, so we called it the C word. And I think I look at the work that's been done over 20 years, and I think we've come a long way, and I think cancer is now very much part of our conversation, and people are aware of it. Sometimes doesn't make it any easier to talk about it, but we know that we have to. So I loved my time of being a leader and a manager. I learned an awful lot. We were a remote team. So this current way of working is not new to me at all. This is what I'm used to. It was very hard to leave the NHS, to leave a busy ward, and then my office became the dining room, which I think we've all had to learn to do over the last 6 weeks. But where we are at the moment, that for me, this is my normal. And for lots of people out there, this way of working is very normal. But this time last year, I was also stuck at home and I wasn't going out, but for very different reasons. And those reasons were down to work-related anxiety and stress. And it was a hideous time of my life. And it was really hard. And people around me didn't know how to have a conversation about how I was feeling and what I was going through. And I think from there, I learned an awful lot and took time to reflect and decided that it was time to go and put my energy into helping the mental health movement. The one thing that I think I am good at is creating a safe place for hard conversations, hence the title of this webinar. It's a thing that we need to start talking about, but we need to understand it as well. But we don't have to do it alone, we can do it together. And so hence the reason for this and starting this conversation. So again, huge thanks to IPS for really acknowledging that and starting this. So that's me. So I have a lovely assistant, Sam, virtually, who's going to click my slides for me. So Sam, if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So just so that we're all clear, this is a session, this is starting the conversation on mental health. And then this is about finding out what you guys need and what you want. That's managing the expectations of this. You know, in one webinar, we're not going to get all of the answers, but what we're going to do is we're going to start having the conversations, we're going to start finding the answers, and understanding what people need and what they want. And that was something that we all very much agreed when we were planning this, was that at the moment it feels like the internet is just bombarding us with things of, you should do this, you should do that, and this is what we should do for mental health, and this is what you should be doing as a company. And between us, when we were talking about this session, we just asked the question, you know, but who's asking the companies? Who's asking the individuals? What is it that you want and what is it that you need? And we very much wanted that to be part of this session. So I'm going to kick off with starting the conversation. So I will talk hopefully only for about 20 minutes. And then it is over to you. It's very much you. Please use the chat room and put questions in there. I can't guarantee that we'll have all the answers, but I'm hoping that this is also the beginning of a relationship, friendship, where we can carry on this conversation after this webinar, and we'll do everything that we can to support each of you, because the fact that on a Friday morning at 11 o'clock you've all logged into this webinar means that you're interested in this, you know it's important. And like we said, it's important that we don't end the conversation at 12 o'clock. We need to keep that conversation going, and that's certainly what I want to start off with, by offering to you that we carry on with that conversation. So thank you, Sam. Next slide. So yeah, mental health in crazy times. I kind of feel like we have permission to use all of those words now more than ever. We do need to be talking about our mental health. 6 weeks ago, our lives changed. We all went kind of into lockdown. We went to our homes, we packed up our offices, and we all became best friends with Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and our lives really changed. This virus has come into our world, and as a business and as organisations, you're having to think differently. But as human beings, as friends, as family members, you're also having to act and think differently there as well. Some of us are becoming home teachers. Joyful. I have a 13-year-old boy, and the celebration we had last week when his mother managed to answer a fraction question was absolutely amazing, and not the kind of celebration he usually has in his maths lessons. But we're managing a lot, and what we're having to do is we're having to do that all together in one house with the people around us. And actually, if we're looking at us within the work environment and how we're coping and managing work, you can't help but have the impact on your home life as well. So we're suddenly sitting at home, we're setting up our offices, we've figured out the internet, we know whether the broadband can cope with it, we're getting everyone in their places, we're telling families to stay out the room when we're going on a call, we're instructing children and people not to be on the internet when we're doing important things like this, and we've got a lot going on. So 6 weeks ago when this started, I sat back and then I suddenly watched the internet be flooded with the top 100 tips on working from home, and everyone was shouting about mental health, and all I could see for a lot of it was just, we need to be thinking about our mental health, which absolutely I agreed with, but it just seemed like that's all people were saying. We need to be looking after our mental health. And suddenly that was a bit scary because people were talking about mental health who haven't talked about it before. And then it felt like, okay, well, I know I've got to talk about my mental health, but what was there out there for people? It's hard to start talking about mental health if you're not used to it, or if it's not your area. And we were suddenly being told, this is how you should be working and this is what you should be doing. All those top tips on don't look at the news, do look at the news, don't look at social media, do look at social media. And it's confusing. It was really, really hard. And I just sat back and I watched, and I did nothing for 3 weeks. I just watched what was happening. I had to deal with some stuff myself, working on a company where, you know, my business plan was strong last year. I wrote my business plan around, again, you know, about July last year, and my business plan didn't include COVID-19. So it took me a few weeks to sit and think about this. And then I had to kind of work with my own mental health, as I didn't want to be seen to be cashing in on a pandemic. But yeah, I also knew now more than ever people needed to talk about their mental health, and we needed people who were confident and knew what they were doing. And so I just watched, and I was patient and had to kind of figure out my own mental health, as well as I'm sure everyone else has been. So what we do know is that everyone has mental health, okay? There is no health without mental health. We all have it, and sometimes it is the most joyful of friends, and other days it can make the simplest of tasks seem impossible. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. For most of us, what we're all brilliant at doing is putting up a mask. So if I were able to see you all now and I was to say, raise your hand if you're guilty of raising a mask and putting a mask up. So those times when people say, how are you feeling? How are you doing? The quick and easy response is to always say, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's great. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. And I would imagine that if I asked all of you if in your lifetime you've ever done that, everyone would put their hands up. Because for some reason, we are currently living in a world where it's easier to have a mask and say that we're feeling okay, rather than actually be honest and talk about how we're actually feeling. The reason for our mask is because there is an awful lot of stigma around mental health. We're frightened that if we talk about mental health and how we're feeling, and if we're struggling with it, it can often be seen as a sign of weakness. Or it goes back to that, you start that conversation and people don't know how to respond and don't know what to say in return. And so what we do is we put this mask on, but what we don't realise is to have the mask up is absolutely exhausting. It's emotionally draining to keep that mask up. If you have poor mental health or you're not feeling great and you're keeping your mask up and trying to tell the world that everything's wonderful, so on our social medias, we're printing amazing, we're putting up our amazing photos of look at the sunshine and this is great. That's draining. And why do we live in a society where we feel we can only post the brilliant things that are going on in life? Why can't we sit and start having that conversation, start moving that mask, start putting the mask down and start having the conversation around how we're really feeling? So next slide, please, Sam. So we'll all have our own story from COVID-19. At this point, I kind of wish that I could hear people, because you kind of hear the laughter, and I could gauge where you're all at and what your last 6 weeks have been. So we've all learned different things through 6 weeks. So I completely put my hand up. I binged on Tiger King. If there's anyone on this call who hasn't yet, I strongly recommend you do. It's a little bit like chewing gum for the eyes. There's no brain cells needed for it, but quite entertaining, if not shocking at times. Some of us will talk about our new love of Joe Wicks and the amazing PE lesson that they did every day. I'm going to just throw it out there. Joe Wicks has sent me mad. I haven't done one PE session and I refuse to. Some of us have fallen in love with knitting. Others are into yoga. We're suddenly all loving our gardens. And I, last week, gave in and entered the world of TikTok to imagine and to understand what that was all about. I confess I haven't produced any films for TikTok, but again, chewing gum for the eyes when you need that switch off. So we'll all have our own story. And I think what we need to know is that everyone will have their own story, and they deserve to have their own story. And some of them, if not most people, will talk about this joyful story that they had from COVID-19. The next slide, Sam. But not everyone is going to tell their story. And for some people, their story started before COVID-19 started. And this story of them and their world and what's going on in their head has been going on for weeks, months, and for some people will be years. And they've never told anyone their true story. And we have to be really, really aware of this. At a point where as well, there's so much speculation around when do we go back to our new normal? What is the new normal? So many questions around what that looks like. But we've been told for 6 weeks to stay in, keep safe, don't go out. Just that thought of when that conversation starts to go back out, suddenly people are going to be scared. People suddenly don't want to leave their house. People are going to be scared to come back to work, to go on public transport, to go back to the office, because they don't want to catch this virus that we've just been talked about and told is frightening and can be scary. Some of us have just lived through experiences of bereavement, of death, and of going through this virus. And in all that time, we've had to deal with these things in the place of our home, with little support around us. And suddenly we have to go back to our new normal. And it's going to be really hard for people. And that's why it's really important that we get to a place where people feel they can tell their story. Because as much as people can come to work and they have that work mask for themselves, there's a whole heap of stuff that's been going on for people personally. We know in the news that lots of people have been, we know that in the news, for example, domestic violence has increased. We know that there has been an increase in child abuse online. Yesterday, I was talking to a colleague, a counsellor, who has seen an increase of, in 4 hours, 2,500 young people had contacted her online counselling service, which was kind of, they don't get those numbers in hours. They usually get that number in a month. We are living in a very different world. And like I said, we'll all have a very different story. When it first happened 6 weeks ago, we talked a lot about anxiety, and there was in those 3 weeks where I was watching the internet talk about how people's mental health was, and there was a lot of talk around people with anxiety are going to really struggle with this. And what was really interesting was, again, through some other work that I'm doing, what we found was in the first few weeks, actually people who are living with anxiety disorders were really calm for the first few weeks, because suddenly they were being told to stay in, which was their safe place. And suddenly they were kind of normal. They were the normal, because suddenly we were in a culture and a society where people were talking about anxiety. And for the first time, people were living with anxiety or experiencing anxiety for themselves, as we understood this virus and what was happening to the world. So actually people who were living with anxiety disorders, for the first time ever, felt normal, felt that their feelings and their experiences were beginning to be the same as everyone else within society. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to learn, because our reaction, and when you watch the internet was telling us people with anxiety, they're going to go into a meltdown, they're going to really struggle. But actually, we were learning from people that we were talking to, people who were living with anxiety, they were all right in those first few weeks. They were being told to stay in and be safe in your home. And that was ticking all the boxes for them. But obviously, there's lots of conversations now, and anxiety can be sparked in lots of different ways. So whether that's whether you're looking at numbers and the increase of each day, if you're looking at the briefing, then we see those numbers of diagnosis, of the testing, of the deaths, and it's becoming very real and it's getting bigger. Those numbers just increase. But then we also know from a realistic world, people are on furlough, people are losing jobs, the conversations of redundancy are happening, but bills still need to be paid. And there's so much uncertainty. So we can recognise that anxiety is going to start growing for people. Depression, again, these are big subjects, big diagnosis, and I wouldn't even attempt to try and do a lesson and an understanding on all these areas, because that takes beautiful time and patience and safe places to learn about them. But depression is common. Anxiety and depression are the most common mental health illnesses in people in the UK, and people will be experiencing this, and for some it will be the first time, and for some it won't be the first time. Like we said before, for some it will be something very real to them that they live with every day. But people live with it on different levels. Recovery is always an option. Hope is something that you must always give to people, and I think if you remember anything from this, remember that if you are ever talking to someone who is experiencing poor mental health, just give them hope. Recovery does happen. And I think we don't talk about that enough. And that's a really powerful thing that you can tell someone who is experiencing poor mental health. We also need to acknowledge suicide is happening. Suicide happens anyway. On average in the UK, 15 people a day die by suicide. Globally, somebody dies by suicide every 40 seconds. And we're not talking about that. We're scared to have those conversations. We're scared, and it's hard to ask those questions. We know that suicide, at the root of suicide, will be another mental health illness, and that could be depression, that could be anxiety. But at the end of the day, that is untreated depression, untreated anxiety. That's people not being brave enough to ask the question, are you having suicidal thoughts? What are we going to do about that? Tell me about that. Start that conversation. And we can do it, because if we start asking those questions, I guarantee we will save lives, which again, I find incredibly powerful to know that we can save lives by starting a conversation. Thank you, Sam. Next slide. So where do we start? And like I said, we're not going to have this webinar isn't about me going into all the details and teaching you about all those different areas of mental health. If you want that, I can certainly offer you that. But that's not what this is about today. What this is about is who is serious about supporting the mental health of people in their organisation. Because if you are serious about it, you kind of have to acknowledge you're going to have to do a little bit of work. It can't just be a tick box exercise and say, yes, we acknowledge mental health because we mention it every now and again, or we do a coffee morning, or I went on a webinar, so tick, we do mental health, we support it. You're going to have to do a little bit more about it. And if you are really serious about wanting to make a change and be an organisation who is absolutely proud to stand with their heads held high and say, yes, we support the mental health of our staff, then that starts with changing the culture in how your company talks and thinks about mental health. And that's big, that's huge, that's a big piece of work, but it can be done, and it can be done well. And if you get people who really support and understand mental health, you can make brilliant changes in a short amount of time. And again, you will have a massive impact on both your staff, but also your work and your income. Stats are coming later for that. So next slide, please, Sam. So there's quite a lot of words on here. I kind of broke all the rules there for PowerPoint and just put a lot of words in. For anyone who just wants a breakdown of the key messages, I have got a handout so I can email that. You can contact me afterwards and I can email that along. But in a nutshell, how do you change culture? Like we said, it's not just a one-off coffee morning. It has to be more to that. So if we look through this list, it's about you have to knock down the stigma that surrounds mental health. That is something that is in our society, and we as a group of amazing people can start doing that. But you have to knock down the stigma in order to make people feel safe to have those conversations. The reason why people don't talk is because of the stigma and because of the judgment that is put on mental health. And we need to start knocking that down. We need to think about our language. So as a company, become confident, use the words related to mental health, start the conversation. It's about, say the words depression, say the words anxiety, say the word suicide. If we're saying it, if someone is living with it and you're brave enough to say it and you're demonstrating that you're talking about it, they know they're in a safe place, okay? They know that you're acknowledging it. And what you are doing is you are starting to knock that stigma down. And that is so powerful. To hear someone use the right words can be so powerful to someone who is living with it and who has not shared their story. So let's start being confident. Let's use those words. Your actions. So again, demonstrating to staff that you're committed to supporting mental health. So for some people are doing it brilliantly, and I'm sure we have people on this webinar who are doing amazing things already. And for those people, that's brilliant. Thank you. And we can learn so much. Please, again, language, knock down the stigma. Tell people, praise and shout about the work that you are doing. But you look at that, people can look at doing a wellbeing strategy or creating a wellbeing program. I worked with a local company to me recently, very small company, but they knew that they needed to talk about mental health. So I went in and did a very small session, very bespoke to them and what their needs were. And by the end of it, the next day, they'd created a wellbeing team, and they'd already started working on their wellbeing strategy and program that they were going to put within the company, which was just amazing. But again, they had people who wanted to drive it, and that's key to changing your culture. Get those people on board. To change culture, leadership need to play a huge part in this. So if leadership are showing support to the conversation of mental health, that is going to create your biggest safety net. Okay, so it has to come from the top. I've worked in organisations where I would absolutely put my hands up and say I had leaders who talked the talk and went, yeah, we need to support mental health. They did not want to talk about their own mental health. Every time I engaged, whether it was about their own or whether it was about just generally, actually you could tell within seconds that they were uncomfortable with it. Which then made me question how serious they were every time they said they were going to support our mental health. Actually, I didn't feel safe to talk about my mental health because I knew that the leadership team weren't supportive of this, because I knew they weren't comfortable to have that conversation. So I wasn't safe to talk about my mental health because of the worry and the fear of the response that I was going to get from that. So the mask went back up and no one knew about it. And that was then months and years of a hard journey with poor mental health, but with a leadership that I knew wasn't supportive of it. So leadership can play such a massive part in this if they show their support to the conversation. So training to understand what mental health is. My goodness, no one expects everyone to be an expert in this, but there is amazing training out there. My background, my training is all very supportive of Mental Health First Aid England, who I champion and think they're a brilliant organisation, and very much led by what they do and support their work. And a lot of the training that I deliver is based and is very much their services. But it's about that training. Let's understand what mental health is. Let's go into more depth, because again, we can't do that now. But once you start talking about it, let's understand what is depression, what is anxiety. Like, I've never experienced it, so how can I be a champion of talking about it? So let's learn about it. Let's understand what the triggers are. As managers, as leaders, if you know what the triggers are, if you know what the signs are, you are going to be picking that up very quickly within your team. And you can start that conversation, but make that team training, do it cross-departmental. Some might be teams, get everyone involved. Could be simple, start a program, lunch and learn, make everyone part of it. Learn to listen and communicate non-judgmentally. The biggest lesson in life, and especially to knocking down stigma. It's hard. I call it face leak. It's that time when someone says something and sometimes you want to go, what? I can't believe you just said that. And it's very much showing on your face what you're thinking. But we have to learn to listen, and we have to learn that communication, that we're not judging people. Do that and you've got your safe place. Combine your virtual and face-to-face learning. Now more than ever, I would say that actually my experience has been over the last few weeks. I was supposed to go and deliver quite a few training sessions face-to-face, and we changed it to virtual learning because the CEO of the charity in particular that I was working with last week still felt that now more than ever he wanted to put this training on for his staff because he couldn't reach them and they were all in their own homes. And actually the feedback was amazing. I was quite nervous about it, but actually nearly everyone emailed me afterwards to just say, I felt really safe in my home to start this conversation. And I'm glad that I kind of had a screen to kind of protect me to start this conversation. So that was a massive learning curve for me. People, now is a good time to start this conversation, especially when we think about those people who are going to be anxious about coming back to work. So yeah, but face-to-face as well is always important. Creating a safe place for conversations is incredibly powerful. As a trainee counsellor, I know that the picking up on body language, on the way that people are looking and the way that they're acting, you can pick up an awful lot. So don't ever, let's not forget the face-to-face, but a combination of the two will hopefully tick all boxes for all styles of learning. Support and understand both good and poor well-being. Again, that's, let's make it joyful when we are feeling great. Let's celebrate that, because sometimes we then kind of just focus on all the bad stuff. Sometimes you need to stop and go, do you know what? I feel absolutely amazing. And a month ago, I couldn't even get out of bed. And that was my biggest challenge, was to get out of my pajamas. And a month later, I'm suddenly back at work. I'm out of bed. I'm having a shower. I'm getting dressed, and I'm ready to go. Celebrate those joys. Celebrate those joys with those people that you know are living and are currently on their mental health journey. A signposting toolbox is great. You can make that a virtual thing. Understand your company, what there is. I know that some companies have brilliant online things and packages for mental health as well as physical health. Just keep reminding people, make there a place, whether it's online, that people can go to. It might be that you want to list organisations that people can contact. Again, keep it simple. Get Samaritans down there in a crisis. Get those other things down there, and let people access it. A wellbeing team, we've said this, include all people across your organisation. People who love it will embrace it. Encourage people to remove their mask by starting the real conversation. That's what you need to do, is getting rid of the mask. Trust, create that trust, and remember that you're not expected to become an expert in all things in mental health. The next slide, Sam, please. This was just something that, some feedback that I got from last week, which was very much saying that, yeah, she actually, from being behind a screen, actually really helped her to learn and gave her time to reflect afterwards. So I think that sometimes it's just important that actually virtually we can do a lot of learning, and people are ready to start talking about it. So our safe place for these hard conversations could start at home and might be through a screen, but also it can be about face-to-face when it's needed. And next slide, please, Sam. So a reminder, just some stats from a work perspective, and for the wonderful leaders who have joined this, this webinar. These are the facts. This is how powerful mental health is. So work-related stress, depression or anxiety accounts for 44% of work-related ill health and 57% of working days lost. That was in 2017-18. This is big. This is costing. Mental ill health costs the UK employers an estimated 33 to 44 billion pounds per year for the UK economy as a whole. These costs are up to 99 billion per year. They're big numbers. 75% of people with diagnosable mental illness receive no treatment at all. And people with a diagnosed mental health condition have been shown to be at a higher risk of attempting and completing suicide. They're big numbers, and it's a big fact. And it's a conversation that we need to start, because this is impacting all of your life, all area of the working life and the working world. Thank you, Sam. So that is it. I need to stop talking. Every company is very different, in the same way that every story will be very different. And so again, it's really important that we don't just go out there and create one thing for everyone, because you're all going to need something different. Like we said, you're at different levels. Some of you will already be doing amazing things, and this is about you going off going, but what else can we do? What, are we doing enough? Is there something else we can do? And some of you might be at the beginning of your journey and might be thinking, right, okay, how do I start? Where do I start? And I think that we just wanted to start that conversation now, and to just find out what it is that you need and what you want. So I'm going to pass back to Tim, because I think Tim's been looking at the chat.
Susie, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really invaluable. I can see a few questions coming through now. Please do add some more questions to the chat area, and I'll read them out. I'm going to start with one myself, and then hopefully we can lead into one. It fits into talking about understand the triggers and the signs. But as a manager, when I'm on the phone to people or on a Teams chat, I'm really interested to know the things I should be looking for. Clearly, I can improve the environment. I can do a lot of different things, and you've gone through this wonderfully. But are there things that are just obvious, or things I should be having in the back of my mind that I should be looking for to raise or to engage, just to create that safe environment?
Yeah, I would say probably the most obvious one, Tim, is to try and is recognizing a change in someone's behaviour. And that could be either thing. So that, I mean, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because it could be if someone's changing behaviour is suddenly they're becoming quite quiet, if they're suddenly not delivering their work on time. It's about and that's what it's about. It's about taking the time, knowing your team, knowing individuals. And suddenly it's about, if you can see that things are changing in the way that they work and the way they talk and the way they communicate, at that point, have a conversation and say, how are you? How is everything? Because, you know, I've noticed the reports aren't getting in as usual, or I've just noticed, you know, you seem a lot quieter. How are things for you at the moment? As simple as starting that conversation. And what they might do, Tim, is someone might start saying to you straight away how they're feeling. The chances are they won't. And so what's important for you as a manager is to have that on your radar. And what I would say is keep checking in with them. So make that a weekly conversation and keep asking that question, because it takes a brave person to then take the mask down and start the conversation. But what you've done by asking the question is someone knows that you are genuinely interested. And so if you keep asking, they know that you're going to keep asking. And when they're ready, they will tell you. But the obvious one would be look for a change in behaviour. Or it might be that they're suddenly the other extreme and like super organised, and suddenly everything's in its place and yet this is sorted. So when you look at, it's a big thing, there's a whole wonderful training on it. But if you look at suicide, actually, the signs for someone considering suicide can be quite extreme. So that could be someone who's becoming very withdrawn, and kind of like their whole general appearance might change, or just their, you know, kind of like that whole sense of I don't know, kind of like of not wanting to live. But then other people get everything in order. So kind of go, right, okay, I'm getting everything in order, and I've kind of got this relief because I know that I'm going to end everything at the end of this day. And actually some people then become really organised. But what you're looking for there is a sudden change in behaviour. And when you see that change in behaviour, stop and have a conversation.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I really take that on board. And it's also, I think, for me, just seeing that actually how you can make sure people see that you are genuine about having that conversation. So I think
yeah,
we're all
absolutely
different things. We're all have our own worries in these different COVID time, but actually to take the step back, I think actually, no, I'm here to have that conversation. It's not just me just asking the once, and I'm not going to remember the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think again, Tim, it's about using those words and saying, I've noticed you're not yourself. That's just as powerful to say, I've noticed you're not yourself. How are you feeling at the moment? Tell me what's going on at the moment. What's going on for you at the moment? So what you've said there is you've acknowledged, like, I've seen that you're not being yourself. I've asked you the question, you know, how are things and what's going on for you right now? You make it about that person. It's suddenly not about the report or about that bit of work over there. It's about, actually, let me find out what's going on here, because if we acknowledge that and we start that conversation, we can start getting that person, you know, if they need help, we can signpost and get that help. Or we just start that conversation. They might just turn around and someone might just say, do you know what, I am really struggling. They might come out and start telling you a personal thing and say, actually, you know, yeah, my dad died. You know, sometimes at work people don't share things, but suddenly you've got someone who's living with a bereavement, and that's going to have an impact. A bereavement can be a trigger for depression, for anxiety, for all those things. So suddenly it's about creating that whole picture and understanding it. And as much as you're all in the work environment, every one of us has a personal life as well. And the impact that we're currently going through COVID-19, you will have people who work in your companies who are on the front line, who are working for the NHS, who are in the supermarkets, and with that will possibly come a fear for the families who are at home, who are like, okay, I'm worried about my loved one who's going out, that person's then coming into my house. There's a lot going on, and that has an impact on someone's mental health, which then has an impact on how they're delivering at work.
Susie, we've had a couple of questions come through. Are you able to access the chat facility yourself? Because one of them is a little bit longer, and if I try and read it out, I'm not going to get it all right. So,
right, let's have a look. Yes, I can see.
So we have two there. Shall I read out the first one whilst you get your head around the second one? The first question is, how effective are employee online surveys in helping companies find out how their employees are thinking and feeling in the current environment?
I think that so I don't have any stats or evidence to show you. I think they are incredibly important because I think they demonstrate that you are asking the question. And I think that is so important, that essentially you are starting that conversation. I think what you need to bear in mind with the results there is not everyone's going to be telling you everything. So again, there's still that stigma and there's still that worry. But there will be some people who will start telling you and will be open and honest about how they're feeling. So I would say absolutely always do surveys, because I think that even, post COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, this is going to go on for months and years. And I think that even more so then your surveys are going to be really important and have to play also a crucial part, that if you in your role want to be demonstrating the importance of a wellbeing program, or whether you need a budget for it or anything, it will be your surveys that will help you. That's your evidence. So from a work perspective, it gives you the data that you need. Always caveat it that it's mental health. So there's probably, I would always say the statistics you get from those surveys are probably a lot lower than the reality, because people are worried in saying stuff. But from a staff point of view, I think they're incredibly important, because you're asking them the question, and that's what people need to know.
Perfect. If I read out the next question and then you can come back with your answer. As an employer, we have found ourselves in a challenging situations where a line manager has asked the question and the employee says they need support, but they don't know what, but 100% expect the employer to offer support and changes. The employer's risk is knowing what to offer without a remit and what to suggest. What advice would you offer employers in such a case?
Yeah, so I think that's a brilliant question. I think it goes back to one of the slides where I did a bit of a signposting tool. Also, as employers, you have a responsibility in the sense of a kind of safeguarding responsibility to your staff. And what you also need to bear in mind is there is only so much that you can do. So a lot of it will be around signposting to people. I know that sometimes that's hard at the moment, because, for example, signposting could be to go to their GPs. And I know that this isn't the time or place, but we could all have an argument, or a debate, not an argument, a debate around the effectiveness of GPs and waiting lists. We also know that people who are who need mental health services, there's not a lot of funding. The funding there is rubbish. It's currently through this pandemic, the mental health budget and funding has been stopped. That's not been recognised as a serious area to kind of contribute to. So we know that there are problems there, but as an employer, there's actually so much you can do, in the sense of it is very much signposting. I think if someone is in a crisis, they have to go to Samaritans. You know, again, don't take this all on yourself. Samaritans are brilliant at what they do in a crisis. And I think what you should do, if you're going to look at that signposting toolbox, it's about allow yourself some time to investigate what there is. So there are some online, so again, Mind, there's all sorts of lots of organisations who are offering online support. I know that some people have to pay for it, but again, there are some other free ones out there as well. A lot of this at the moment will very much be in talking therapies. A lot of counsellors are doing it either telephone or online. I obviously am a huge advocate for them. And what I would say is if someone speaks to an online counsellor, if they're not the right person for them, encourage them to find someone who is. Don't let them stop. Don't give up on talking therapy because the one person you spoke to, you didn't get on with. There are lots of other good people out there, and sometimes you need to find the right person to talk to. So I would say that is what's brilliant about your signposting toolbox. Get the organisations and charities down, like within a crisis. It is very much encouraged GP conversations. Talking therapies are amazing and brilliant. And just have a little look around, see what's either local. So I think if you go back to work when you're in the office, see what organisations are available locally to the office, because also you have to bear in mind that some people might tell you something at work that they're not telling their family. And so it's about look at what's local to where your main offices are, and encourage them as well to kind of look for things that are local to them. But originally, if Esther, I know you wrote that message, I would be more than happy to explore that a bit more and send you some more details on what that signposting could look like. So please get in touch. But essentially, to deal with that, it's about signpost to professionals. Don't feel you have to take all of that on. Sometimes that's all you can do.
Perfect. We've got another quick question here. Do you have any tips on how we can all cope when we have to get back on public transport or go to busy places or returning back to a busy working environment? Or we're back mixing with larger groups.
Yeah, so that one is there's again, I could say you could create a brilliant coping kind of toolbox for people. There's a few things that I have, and again, Mark or anyone who's interested, I've got lots of things that I could share. But what essentially it's a little bit like those coping mechanisms, because I think, like you said, when we go back to the real world and going out into the public and transport, what's likely to happen there is everyone's anxiety levels are going to start going up. So I think that's what people are going to be experiencing. So from my personal experience, last year, when I was going through my anxiety, what came with mine was panic attacks going on a train and going into London, because suddenly work was my fear, was my stress. And even like the simplest things of getting on a train and going into London was the hardest thing I had to do. But so what I had to do is I had to try and find ways to, basically it's about focusing on your breathing. It's slowing your breathing down. That's what, if you can slow your breathing down, your anxiety comes down. And that gives you a focus for those situations, for those high anxiety situations. So for me, I would hold a I used to hold a crystal, which was citrine, which is why my company is called Citrine Wellness, because it was my lifeline. So every time I got onto a train, I would have a piece of citrine, and it's about basically getting in touch with your senses, focusing on my breathing, and that would get me my 1 hour train journey. It would get me through my meeting, because it was just something for me to focus on and keep my breathing slow. So there are some beautiful mindfulness and ideas out there, and I think it would be amazing if as a company you created this little toolbox of things that people could do to kind of help people prepare them when they come back, when they have to start those travelling back into London, if that's helpful.
That's brilliant. Susie, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, whilst we waited a couple of moments to see if any more questions come through, I just want to introduce you to Rob Baker, who will just talk to us for a couple of minutes about a session we're planning in a couple of weeks' time. The Rob's also someone we've known for a fair while. He's over 40 years working in the HR and the talent arena. He was most recently working in the D&I consult. He was leading the D&I consulting for the international region at Mercer, and he was named an agent of change by Management Today in 2019. But I've passed you through to Rob, and I can see he's just added another question in there, so I'll allow Rob to ask that directly to Susie and to talk a little bit.
Hey, thanks, Tim, and hello, everyone. And it's really, Susie, what a fantastic job this morning to really get us all thinking about this and how we can help and support colleagues in the workplace. I did ask a question, maybe we come back to it, about mental health first aid and whether those kind of programs are effective. Basically, kind of, can any employee be a first aider, or are there certain sort of things you should look for? You know, if you go back to work, and companies might want to set this up, you know, what kind of attributes should they be seeking, if at all, in their employees to kind of be effective first aiders? So actually, maybe you could address that first.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I'm a huge advocate for the mental health first aider, and I love, and as an instructor, I love delivering this program. And what I have learned is, to be a brilliant first aider, you just need to be passionate in wanting to make a change and wanting to learn about mental health. I have been in some organisations where I've delivered the course, and it's been very obvious the candidates who have just been sent there. So if don't send across someone who is nervous or worried to come and do the first aid training. So the first aid program and training is 2 days, and it is quite in depth around specific illnesses. So it does go into a big conversation session around suicide. It's understanding depression, psychosis, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm, all of those things it does go into. So don't send someone on it if they don't want to go, if they don't want to talk about it or learn about it. Don't. If someone is interested in it, they will gain so much from that training. But we do also offer other programs. So there is for example, a mental health awareness online, which is a 4-hour session. It is face-to-face, but Mental Health First Aid have just turned it into, they're allowing us to do it online during this current time, and hopefully we'll continue it as well. And that's just a really introduction to mental health. So we don't go into the bones of what all those illnesses are, but that's a beautiful way. And I think that when you go back to, do we create a team, kind of like a mental health champion, you're going to have different levels. You're going to have some people who are like, okay, I just want to be aware of what mental health is. And then you're going to have your mental health first aiders who are like, right, I'm going to go into the depth of this. I'm going to understand it, and I will start those conversations. Or people know they can come to me for those conversations. And again, other people will look like little lunch and learns, like I think we mentioned. For some people, I've spoken to, again, another company who's actually looked at talking about some separate one-to-one supervision to offer people, and that can be done virtually. Again, that's very much around my counselling and talking therapy. So yes, sorry, Rob, that was a ramble, but the qualifications are be passionate about it and want to learn, and they will get so much from a first aider, and companies will as well.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm delighted to be working with Tim, Susie and IPS to basically help broaden out the conversation. We've been talking about a very important topic today, mental health, and that's obviously going to be ongoing, and it's going to be kind of needed for a very, very, very long time. But what we also wanted to do was try and address other issues that you as employers will be thinking about as we all try and get back to whatever the new normal is going to be. And obviously there's been lots of discussion about what the new normal might look like. There's lots of different conversations going on about that already, lots of different angles to it. We wanted to pick out, for example, what do your leaders need in terms of support in this new environment? What do your staff need? And I guess one of the questions that I'd be thinking about is, have you been asking your staff what they need, or have you been asking their leaders what they need to help them as we kind of all get back into this new environment? And of course, what is the new environment going to look like? Are we all going to be in offices, back in offices, an open plan with social distancing, or how are we going to collaborate? Or is this now a sort of permanent shift to flexible working, or a mix? So on the 12th of May, we're going to have another session like this, and we'd really like to address the questions that you've got, and it can be anything and everything about kind of dealing with the post-COVID-19 environment as we all get back to whatever this, or get into this new normal. So what I'd like to sort of ask, if anyone has any immediate thoughts right now that will be great. You know, feel free to share them either on the chat or unmute yourself and come online if that's okay, Tim. But also after the call, if you're thinking about this, you think, oh gosh, there's something I really would like to cover on the 12th of May, or make sure we cover, then, you know, do send an email into Tim or Jane or the team, Nikki or the team at IPS, because they'll be able to relay that on to me, and then we'll be working together to put the session together. So, as I said, it's about anything to do with the business aspects of preparing for the new normal, whatever that's going to look like for all of us, but in particular thinking about how we might need to support leaders and how we might need to support our staff, you know, more broadly as we sort of try and return to some semblance of whatever the new normal looks like. So, Tim, hopefully that set up our conversation for the 12th.
Absolutely perfect. We will send around details to everybody on the dates and the time and the links for the session on the 12th. But we really will value your input. That we're trying to make sure we're coming up with things which are current, which are relevant, which are useful to people to engage with. So really, we want your input. The Rob came up with a brilliant idea as well when I was talking to him earlier on in the week about whether it's doing something on how we get the introvert to throw out their ideas. And it's all well and good if we're in a team meeting where we're all in the office together, but actually on Teams or on various other forums where it's quite easy for the people who don't want to talk to hide away. Well, how do we get them contributing, particularly in an environment where we don't really all have the answers because everything is new? So there's a wide range of things we can discuss, but we want to make it relevant and useful. So any ideas are welcome. Susie, let's come back to you. Thank you so much for today. This has been absolutely brilliant. I've certainly learned a lot, and I sense in a way for a lot of HR departments, they're worrying about how their managers are going to be working with their team on the mental health challenges. So I kind of feel I'm very much on the spotlight, so hopefully I can do a good job there. But thank you so much. This has been brilliant. I think everybody was. I want to thank you on that. Is there anything you want to add now, or just anything to throw out there before we end the session?
No, just to say thank you for everyone who logged on. Hopefully, like you said, hopefully it was helpful in some way. And even if it just gets people thinking, and I'm here, please make a note of my email address. And if there's anything that I can do to help, whether that's training, whether that's whether it's something that you want more bespoke for your company, I'm here and would love to help. It's something that I feel incredibly passionate about, which hopefully comes across, and hopefully that can also help that start that conversation in your organisation. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, and thank you, IPS, for being supportive of this as well.
It's been brilliant. Susie, thank you very much indeed. I'd lead a round of applause, but we're all stuck in our homes, so I won't do that. So have a very good day, everybody. Have a very good weekend, and thank you so much for being part of this.
Susie.
Thank you. Bye.